Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the 2022 HOA Information and Resource Center's annual report review. We'll get going in just a moment here. I want to let a few more people join us here as it's just a minute or two after the top of the hour. So if you'll bear with us for a few more moments, then we'll get going. Thank you. Let me just check the participants here. Perfect. Let's have at it then. Again, thank you very much for joining us today for this. This is a little bit of an atypical forum for the HOA Information and Resource Center, just because it's not on a topic per se, but rather it is a review of our annual report. So with that being understood, I mean, I'm pleased that you've all joined us today to talk about our report. The annual report is a fundamental and really important aspect to our mandate here in the HOA Information and Resource Center. It is directed by statute that we create this, and again, we're pleased to present it to you today. So what the annual report really is designed to do is to provide an overview of what the recent changes are in common interest communities. You might hear me refer to CICs, that's common interest communities. It's also designed to provide an examination of the feedback from homeowners and other interested parties, such as every one of you that has joined us here today. As many of you are likely aware, we receive inquiries and complaints from a wide array of Coloradans, from homeowners to tenants to prospective home buyers, board members, attorneys, community association management companies, even legislators reach out to us from time to time for information about the HOA and a common interest community world. So, and then finally, the report is designed to discuss some of the insights that we have into the trends and the different statistics that we see regarding common interest communities here in Colorado. So with me today, let's do some introductions. I'm David Donnelly. I'm the manager of the Education, Communications, and Policy Program, and I am the former HOA Information and Resource Officer. But with me today, I have two very special guests. First and foremost is Nick Altman, who is the new and current HOA Information Officer. Hey, Nick, you want to jump on and say hi real quick?
Hey, David, how you doing? Glad to be here. Thank you.
Good. And of course, as always, we also have Amanda Lopez with us today, which is the HOA Information Support Specialist. So, hey there, Amanda. Thank you for joining us. Oh, I think you're muted, Amanda.
Hi. Thank you. Okay. I got this. Okay. Thank you guys so much for attending. So we are going to discuss a lot. So be ready. And we have a lot of information for you guys. So thank you all for attending.
Great. Thank you. So as always, any of you that have been with us for our more traditional forums have seen the slide with this information on it, and of course this is the link to the HOA Information and Resource Center's website at dre.colorado.gov, and to go be routed directly to that, if you do /HOA center, that will take you directly to the HOA Center's homepage. If you don't do the /HOA center part, that'll just take you to the Division of Real Estate's website. And from there, of course, you can click on the division programs and select the HOA Center. So either way, perfectly acceptable. It'll get you to the same place. And it's always important for us to point out that we do receive the vast majority of our inquiries are received by email. And I want to emphasize just how helpful and the reaching out to us by email is. I fully appreciate that a lot of individuals out there do reach out to us. They'd like to reach out to us by telephone. However, in my experience with the division, that email really is going to be your best bet to reach out to us for a variety of reasons, but most of all because in providing you a response, we can get you something in writing by replying to you by replying to your email, and maybe it's a link to some useful articles. Maybe it's a blurb about whatever your question might be, giving you a citation to the actual specific part of Kiowa, the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, CCIOA. That type of information, yes, sometimes it can be transferred or conveyed to you by telephone, but when Nick and Amanda can reply to you by email and lay this all out for you point by point, and then you can follow that so that when you're conducting the registration process, or you're trying to take go through those steps in order to request documents, for instance, from your board, you'll have those point-by-point directions in front of you, which should certainly help you a lot. So keep that in mind. And I removed the underlining, the hyperlinking from this, simply so that you could all see that because oftentimes there can be some confusion with our email address. It is Dora_DRE_HOA inquiries @state.co.us. Again, I took the hyperlink off because when the whole email address here is underlined, you don't get to see that there are those underscores there. So I really wanted to emphasize that those underscores are there as part of the process, part of the email address. So before we get into the specifics of the report, I wanted to just hit on a couple of the most commonly requested types of resources that our website has on it, and I'm going to show you where you can find those with just a matter of a handful of clicks real quickly. So I'm not going to read these 5 common questions here, because each of the next couple consecutive slides pertains to those. But so let's start with, where can I locate the slides and recordings of HOA forums? That's like, hey, I want to send this recording to my neighbor or one of my board members. Where can I do that on our website? How can I link this to them so that they can get to it easily and not have to click around and do things in a difficult manner? So this image that we're looking at here is a picture of the HOA Center's homepage. And of course, you might want to pay attention to the big red arrow. If you click on to expand the menu of education and outreach programs, right there you will see HOA forums, which is presentations and videos. And we endeavor, every time that we do one of these training education sessions like this, whether it's an HOA forum or even this recording, we endeavor that to have, in the next couple of days afterwards, we have a little bit of editing that we always have to do on our end, and then we get that posted up onto our YouTube page. So it will be available there within a few days, and concurrently we'll also update this link here with a PDF image of these slides. Now, in the case of this presentation, these slides aren't nearly as exciting as the forums that Amanda and Nick do regularly. They're much more content rich. However, we'll put the slides for this one up too. So if you want to just download the slides so you can reference those a little bit later, they're available for you at this through this link, recent HOA forums. Next, where can I locate and download the annual report? That's why you're all here today, is to learn about the 2022 annual report. However, I'm pleased to share with you that we have every year's annual report since the HOA Information and Resource Center was formed and created. So I believe that it goes all the way back to 2013. So again, from the HOA homepage, HOA Center's homepage, excuse me, just on the right-hand column here, select annual reports, and it will link you directly to them, and then you can view them, download them from there in a PDF format. Next, where can I locate the frequently asked questions on HOAs, the Faqs, the FAQs? Right below the link to the annual report is a link to the FAQs. You will find answers to many of the most commonly queried questions that we receive here in the office there. It's an expansive long page. However, we've broken it down into different sections so that you can really hone in on it. So you're not going to have to read every single answer there, every FAQ, but rather if you're contacting us about how do I file a complaint, you can select what we call the accordion to expand that section of the web page out and then review some information in answer to that FAQ, that frequently asked question. Another question that we receive a lot is for new board members. About just over a year ago, the HOA Information Resource Center produced I think it's about 13 or 14 short little videos, which I think are ideal for any existing board member, but most certainly for any new board member that is coming onto the board. This board member education link, I think, is a really great thing. It's a really great resource. There are links to additional information from there as well. But rather than these long format HOA forums that we have on essentially a monthly basis, these are like 3 to 7 minute long videos. So we're not going to eat up your entire afternoon, I promise. You're going to be able to say, hey, what do I need to do in order to hold a meeting, or what are the general rules about voting or secret ballots, whatever the case might be. You're going to find some quick hits there for you as a board member. So while of course this page that we're referencing is directly was created with the board member in mind, a homeowner, please feel free to review this information as well. It'll help you understand some of the steps that your board is going through in while they're trying to do their job too. And then finally, the last frequently or most commonly asked questions that I wanted to draw reference to you today was, where can I locate the latest legislative summaries? You'll see here in this link from the HOA page, if you expand the Kiowa local statutes and federal laws there, you will see 2022 legislative summaries. As some of you I'm sure know, we are in the midst of the 2023 legislative session that is slated to end in approximately a month from now. I believe that the last day that the session is scheduled to be open is May 9th, after which point we are going to start to see a flurry of HOA-related legislation coming through, maybe getting signed by the governor, maybe being postponed indefinitely by the legislature itself. But this has been a pretty active session, both for homeowners associations, those CICs, but also for real estate in general. Several bills that affect those of you that live in HOAs as well as metro districts very well may pass this session. So keep your eyes peeled on that. And sometime towards middle to the later part of the summer, once we actually know what's being signed, what is going to become effective law, you will see an additional link here for 2023 legislative summaries, which we will be hard at work preparing for you. And of course, then we can follow that up with a forum on the specifics of that legislation as we once we know what's law and what's not law. Of course, at this juncture, we of course can't do that as we're in the midst of the session. So regarding the report itself, now that we've addressed some of those frequently asked questions, I wanted to chat with you. The statute that really creates our office and gives us direction can be found at 12-18-801 of the Colorado Revised Statute, CRS, and specifically subsection 3C of that tells us we are directed to track inquiries and complaints and provide a report on an annual basis. That report for us covers the calendar year. I just want to be clear that it's January 1 through December 31st. So we are talking about the 2022 year right now. And the report technically by statute is created for Amanda, Nick, and I's big boss. That's the director of the Division of Real Estate. However, clearly, as we're sharing it with you, the members of the public, this report is open and available to homeowners, to board members, the public at large, industry professionals and lawyers, lawmakers, and other government agencies, such as DOLA, such as CCRD, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, things of that sort. So, we really do want to encourage you to take a look, to digest this report. We find it to be a really helpful summary of what we've been seeing over that time calendar or that time period. So with that being said, I think we can go ahead and get right into the report. So I'm going to change my screen over to the annual report, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. That's going to entail a lot more scrolling, but for each of you. But nevertheless, so here we are with our basic information, standard table of contents, which I can glance over for right now, but just a moment ago, we referenced 12-10-801-3C, which is the directive to present this annual report. And again, as we mentioned a moment ago, providing an overview of the recent changes to CIC law, an examination of the feedback from the homeowners and board members such as yourselves, lawyers and management companies as well, all alike. That's to be really an inclusive statement there. I'd like to point out that as you go through the report, you will see footnotes. I'm trying to find one right now here we go, right there, a footnote. In this case, we're at footnote number 4 after just one paragraph, but you'll see the references to what those footnotes are referencing. In this case, footnote 4 is a citation to actually a specific section, or well, actually all of the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, Kiowa. So if you needed an official citation for that, for whatever reason, maybe you're a board and you're writing a letter to a homeowner, you can find that detail here in the footnotes. So just wanted to call that attention to everyone's attention as well. After the executive summary, this year we expanded the definition section. We refer to a lot of industry terms throughout this report. Many of you might use the terminology, my property manager. Totally fine language. We know what you're talking about. However, for purposes of this report, we wanted to be clear and thorough while we were, and so we created definitions. So we won't use the term property manager in this report. We will refer to them as a CAM, a community association manager or management company in some cases. And that's just an example. Again, Kiowa, CCIOA. We really wanted to expand out this definition section, and I think that it's fair to say that in years to come, that this definition section may continue to grow even more. I think that so whenever you see a term that is capitalized in this manner, like CIC here, you can look back and say, that means that it's a defined term, something that we've specifically identified in this section definitions. So again, just kind of an explanation of the formalities of our report here. As is the case with every annual report, and every year since the HOA Center has been in existence, some level, at least one or two bills, and in this case, we really have 5 bills that affect CICs directly, and so in many respects, I refer to the current session as an active one for CICs, for common interest communities. However, but that being said, we don't know exactly what's going to pass and what's not going to pass. But I would definitely define 2022 as an active legislative session. With these 5 bills coming through, and most notably, as many of you are aware, 1137 changed the playing field in a significant manner this past year. So every annual report does do a summary of the legislative the bills that in fact have become acts. And so I'm just going to do a quick summary of each of these as we're going through each one of them here. And I would highly encourage you, if you have specific questions, you can certainly reference this annual report, but I'd also suggest that you take a gander at those legislative summaries that we pointed out on the webpage earlier in our conversation today. So, let's start with HB 22-1040. It was expressly passed to preserve and protect unit owners' ability to use and enjoy the common elements that are within the community. A lot of people generally say this bill came about as a result of the pandemic, where thank goodness we're really not where we were three summers ago now. But many of you that might have had a pool or a gym in your community, a lot of those, due to public orders, were closed due to the public health issues, and this bill might have been in part a response to that. And what it requires of boards is that they cannot unreasonably restrict or prohibit users' access to these common elements. And what it does is creates a notification standard that boards must take on and communicate with their homeowners, their unit owners, should in any of their common elements be shut down for greater than 72 hours. And that includes a written notice that needs to have a simple explanation for the reason for the restriction, as well as an indication of the estimated time upon which the restriction or prohibition will no longer exist. So in addition to that being provided to the homeowners in either electronic or written notice to each unit owner, the board also has an obligation to physically post in a visible and clearly legible notice at any access point. So let's say I've got a gym with 2 doors, a front door and a back door. That means board members, you got to put notices on both of those doors. And I would recommend to you that you also check back and make sure that those notices don't inadvertently get removed, or that you used 5-year-old tape and the tape didn't hold it onto the notice onto the door, for instance, what have you, as just a silly example. Those notices need to stay up. So keep that in mind, board members. Next, I'd like to talk about 1137 briefly. And I want to emphasize briefly, 1137 is a comprehensive bill that addressed a wide array of issues within your communities. That includes unit owner delinquencies, notices of violations, opportunities to cure those violations, payment plans, access to small claims court, limitations on interest rates. So I'm not going to go through each and every one of these sections just because the bill is complex, and the bill is, the HOA Center has also provided a couple. We've talked about 1137 in many of our forums, but most notably, I would direct you to what I believe was our HOA forum in October or November, where we spent about an hour and a half going through the HB 22-1137 with a fine point pen. So I'd like to reference or draw your attention to that as we're working through it. But again, I would say that this summary should suffice as a quick, hard, and fast summary of the issues that 1137 addresses. Overall, I think this is a really important bill, and it's definitely created a lot of changes for a lot of your communities. So, as I'm scrolling through, the next bill that we talk about is 1139, and this is a bill that we also received numerous inquiries about here in the division. In short, this bill says that if your communities have public rights of way on them, that means a public city street or a county road, what have you, something that is maintained by the county, not that is not a public thoroughfare, a public right of way, that HOAs can no longer enforce restrictions or covenants, use restrictions on those streets. So if I have a public street, even though up until August 10th of 2022, I was allowed to say no parking of RVs or recreational vehicles or ATVs or snowmobiles, snow machines. Up until August 10th of 2022, you could have had a rule and enforced that through your covenant violation policies. That is no longer the case because this bill says that it's in the public interest for those to be maintained by the city or the state. I mean, proper terminology here is the local government ordinances, resolutions, rules, franchises, license, or charter provision controls. Now, if, for instance, to the contrary, you have a private right of way, it is not a public street or a public highway, those covenants and restrictions can still be enforced by that community. If you are in doubt as a board member or a homeowner for that matter, reach out to your community, reach out to your county or the city that you're located in to determine whether you have public rights of way or not, so that you know, can I or can't I enforce those covenants, or do I have to follow the rules even though my declaration says I can't park my RV in front of my house? Maybe if that's a public right of way, you can. So I want you all to be aware of the opportunity there where you have to learn about that within your community and better understand what the do's and don'ts are in your community. Next, we're going to talk about HB 1314. This is another comprehensive bill that primarily addresses the Public Utilities Commission, what we refer to as PUC here in the government. The PUC is basically a sister or a sibling organization to the Division of Real Estate. It is also housed within DORA, the Department of Regulatory Agencies. So overall, this was a comprehensive overhaul of the towing industry in Colorado, but it really only a few different provisions within this long bill directly affect the HOA world, and I would encourage you to visit the Public Utilities Commission website. They have created lots of educational materials about again what the do's and don'ts are. How long? What do I have to do if I have someone that's parked illegally in my community and I'm a board member? What do I have to do in order to get them towed? Now, if they're in a fire lane, you can get them towed. If they're parked in front of the dumpsters, you can get them towed. But if they're simply parked in someone else's spot, you have to provide proper notice in accordance with the law and post that on their windshields technically, and give them the opportunity to cure that before you can tow them. Nick, I'm sure could attest to the fact that we have heard lots of complaints about people getting towed because they're not familiar or aware that this bill has taken effect. So I encourage you all to, especially board members, but also homeowners, so that you know your rights and responsibilities as well, to know more about what should be going on there. And finally, our last bill that I wanted to talk about in our legislative summary before I pass the mic over to Amanda to talk about registration is SB 22059. And this is a pretty straightforward bill, Senate bill, as opposed to all these other bills, which were HBs, that's House bill. This was presented by the Senate and did pass and became effective. And it really simply clarifies some of the language that you find in that you find in 38-33.3-310. And it merely clarifies that a proxy now terminates 11 months after its date, unless the proxy indicates an earlier date. So I could issue a proxy to Nick for my community that is good for 6 days if I wanted, or for one specific meeting if I wanted to issue that, because I attend every other meeting, but I happen to be out of town on business, what have you. I cannot I cannot sign a proxy granting Nick that authorization to vote on my behalf or attend a meeting on my behalf for 12 months. It automatically expires on at the 11-month period. So really just a formality there. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Amanda, who would like to share a little bit about the registration data that we have in the annual report this year. Amanda?
Yes, thank you so much. Again, thank you all for joining today and listening to us go over this report. It's so much information, as I mentioned. Part of the HOAs and in Colorado, of course, is the registration part of it. And many of you either do or do not know when it comes to registrations. They are required to register, and this is going to be on a yearly basis. So it would be on a yearly basis that they would do a registration. So when we register the HOAs, when they do get registered, there are requirements that we have that we need to collect from board members when they do complete the registration. One of them being, of course, is the fee for the HOA registration. So the way that works, and the fee for the HOA registration is actually going to be dependent on what the annual revenues of the HOA are. So if the annual revenues are below $5,000, then the fee for the registration is going to be waived. However, if they are above $5,000, you will see a fee when it comes to the registration. So again, all of that is all going to be dependent on annual revenues of the association. We do collect the name, of course. We want to know the name of the association. We want to know the name of the management company, if the HOA does have a management company. Some HOAs are going to be managed by the board, which are going to be considered self-managed. And that's the next one. So we want to know if the HOA is self-managed, who that is, and if the HOA is professionally managed, we want to know who that is. We also want to know who the designated agent is for the HOA registration. So one thing, a lot of people get very confused. The HOA's designated agent is not the same thing as the Secretary of State's registered agent. Two separate state departments, two separate licenses, and two separate agents, of course. So with us, with the HOA office, we want to know, again, who the designated agent is. The designated agent here with the HOA office is basically going to be who's responsible for renewing the association, updating any HOA information within the registration, also going to be the contact person when it comes to the HOA. So if a homeowner or anybody wants to look up their HOA and they go onto our website to see, hey, is it registered or is it not registered? What we do is when we collect the designated agent information, that's the person that's going to come up under the HOA's information. So we'll have the HOA information, when it was initially registered, the expiration date, and who the designated agent is. That's going to be the contact person for any information when it comes to HOAs, to that HOA. Also, we collect the address of where the HOA is at. So we want to know, again, the physical address, not the address of a homeowner, not the address of another homeowner or whatnot, or whoever. We want to know where the HOA was registered. And sometimes it's going to be the same as the Secretary of State's. So a lot of their information is going to be mirrored with ours, because it is a requirement that HOAs are registered with the Secretary of State. So all that information is going to be pretty much the same. I want to say the way that the HOA is managed, again, as I mentioned, we want to have if there's a management company, we want to know the address for the management company. We want to have the address of the managing agent or the designated agent. Also, email address. If there are, we need to know the email address of the HOA, again, and this is only for any type of communication that the HOA gets from us. So if the HOA needs to renew, the email address that is provided at the time of registration is who we will be sending our renewal reminders to. So it is up to the HOA to update all that information, whether they are in renewal or not. That way, again, we have a way to remind them, hey, it's time to renew. So for example, yesterday, HOA's April renewals were open. So everybody whose email is on there got that email reminder. Also, if the HOA has a website, we would like to know what's the web address for the website. If there's a management company, again, if it is professionally managed, what's the website for the management company? Phone numbers, contact information. I keep saying this, but if it goes back to if it's the management company, what is their phone number? The designated agent within the management company, we need to know their information. And of course, the number of units within the community. So that's very, very important also. So these are all required questions that need to be answered at the time of registration. And going more in depth of the HOA's registrations, active and expired. So we collect how many active HOAs there are and how many expired HOAs there are. Now, again, keep in mind that this information is from 2021 to 2022. So this isn't the current up-to-date in April's information. So 2021, we had 7,819 active HOAs, and we had 2,815 expired. Again, they are all registered with us. They are all registered. Again, some are active, some are expired, but they count as a whole. And here's kind of an idea of, how many, there are within the state of Colorado. 2022, again, this information that we got from 2022. So we had, what is it? Oh gosh, how many were there? David, okay. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Like 7,000. Yeah, I was like, I'm looking at that. 7,976 that were actively registered. And then total for that was 11,048. So again, within the active and expired in 2022, the total of that was 11,048. And to these registered communities, they contained 1,041,505 total units in the state of Colorado. So as you can see, there are a ton of HOAs, of course, in Colorado. And with reports from the Census Bureau in 2020, the population of Colorado is 5,773,000. So with that, I mean, there's so many of them. There's almost, I want to say 2 million, what is it? 2,707,913 currently, right? Is that what the current is?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's our estimated number of, based on again some information from the United States Census Bureau. We used an estimated 2.6 residents per unit in Colorado. So by playing with some math here, it turns out that we estimate that approximately 46.9% of all of Colorado's population, that 5.7, almost 5.8 million individuals, almost 47% of them reside in an HOA.
So many of them. Yeah, that's a ton. And then are we going to do the management type, the types of managements, self-managed HOAs, again, that's within the board. If there is no management company, it's going to be a self-managed HOA. Professionally managed, of course, is if the HOA has a management company that they hire to do that. So there are two different types that we need to get when it comes to HOA registration. So all that information is recorded. And then there's what was that one? Sorry, David, I'm like trying to, okay. So yeah, okay, so the hybrid management also. So I'm trying to read into that. I have the other one that's on my end of it where it's highlighted. So
let me chime in on the hybrid, just because I think that this is an important thing for people that are really going to get down into the weeds on some of this. For purposes of this report, we say, are you self-managed or are you professionally managed? But the reality is that we're not necessarily, a lot of your communities are not black or white like that. There is a lot of gray in there. There are lots of your communities that might utilize a CAM for certain services, but the board members might manage or take on some of that responsibility themselves. Maybe they just want to rely on the CAM for vendor management, repairs, and the like, getting insurance and things like that. But they want to handle collections on their own. Just an example. I mean, and so that's something where where a board has elected to not necessarily hire a CAM as a full service for full range of services, but rather has gone kind of a la carte with and said, we want the CAM to do A and C and Q, but we're going to do all the rest of it ourselves. So that's when we refer to this hybrid management aspect. I think that's an important thing for us for you to understand, is that there is that gray area where if you've got a CAM for any purposes, you identify in Amanda's registration as a professionally managed community. However, the reality is that your management company might not be doing everything. And again, that's subject to what you choose to contract, what you and your CAMs agree to. That I'm going to do this and you're going to do that.
Thank you so much for chiming in on that one, David. So going into that, of course, so at the end of 2022, there were 7,976 active registrations with the division. So as a figure, there's a figure below that will show that there's 7,976 active and 6,932 that were, are those ones the expired ones? Oh gosh, I'm so sorry.
No, this is just.
Okay. Yeah, so, and again, these are all there, this is all the active and the expired ones that were from last year's. So as you can see, 80% of them were active and 20% active and professionally managed, and 20% of them were active and self-managed. So it kind of just, I mean, we really don't know until they report it to us. And again, we report it back to you guys. But yes, there are, for these ones, they go by, is it a planned community? Is it condominium or cooperative? And we again collect all of this information at the time of registration. So here above, it was 61.868 plus everything else after that, that were planned communities. And self-managed communities, there were 34.72. And these were all self-managed condos. Self-managed cooperatives, it is 3.40 about. So go ahead.
Then you can juxtapose that with the breakdown by type of professionally managed, which you see how these numbers are pretty substantially different. Professionally managed planned communities, it's about 48.7%. Professionally managed condos, just north of 50%, and again, a very small percentage of professionally managed cooperatives. Now, overall, I mean, both on this figure and the previous figure that Amanda discussed, I mean, the number for cooperatives there overall is pretty small, and that's just due to the number of cooperatives that we see in the state. Since the majority of our communities are either are either planned communities or condos, that's why you see the co-op number being low in the first place. But at the same time, for those of you that really like numbers, we wanted to include kind of some of that breakdown. And I think the next. With that, Amanda, anything else you wanted to share about the registration process, or before we jump on to the number of inquiries that we have?
As far as the registration process, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of the registration process. Again, I mean, there's so many requirements that we need, and again, these are all from Secretary of State and from the HOA board itself. And a lot of this information that we get, these HOAs, they report back to, not report, but they do as far as with the clerk and recorder's office. So a lot of information is that what they have to provide when they record the documents. We need the booking page number, we need the day that the HOA was recorded with the clerk and recorder's office. So again, there's a few other requirements that I didn't mention, of course, but on our website, on our HOA website, there is a list of all the requirements that are needed when it comes to HOA registration.
Thanks for that very much for that explanation, Amanda. I'm just taking a look. I see Helen pointed out something in the chat here, which I'd like to scroll up and specifically point out as well. It's on page 18, and it's this section here. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph to you, but I think that it's an important clarification, especially for you board members out there. Because it's something that we hear a lot. Both Amanda and Nick can certainly, I think, would agree to this, which is that there is this conception that if I'm a board member, let's say I'm the president, and I hire a CAM, that absolves me of all responsibilities. That is incorrect, and I want to be abundantly clear with each and every one of you. The board is still responsible. They still have to hold their meetings. They still have to pass resolutions and vote. Just because you have a CAM in place, a community association manager is a invaluable for many of your communities resource, but they do not get to step into the role of the board. The board still has responsibilities. And so, so while you're going through this report at a later time, I really want, and you are a board member, I really want you to pay special attention to this because it is a common misconception that we hear about a lot. So just, again, food for thought as you're working through it. So thanks, for, Helen, for pointing that out. With that being said, let's get on to some inquiries. So this year, in 2022, we saw an overall increase in the number of inquiries we received vis-a-vis 2021. And it's approximately a 17% increase. For this year, we had a total of 4,276 inquiries. As many of you know, the HOA Center is a two-person office. It's Nick and Amanda. And so you break that down, that's numerous inquiries every single day. There are only so many working days out there. I point that out not only to show you that I mean, but we're here working. I guess is why I point that out. But I would suspect, I guess time will tell here, but I would suspect that as the HOA Information Resource Center continues to enhance its forms of outreach, the number of inquiries that we're going to receive are going to increase. So overall, though, we try our best to sort of break down the nature of these inquiries. Inquiries can range be a really wide variety of things. So what we've tried to do in this figure 5.1 is kind of categorize them into different types of inquiries. I mean, just generally what the HOA Center does. Then another section would be, what are the types of governing documents? What kind of priority? What's the hierarchy of them? What are they supposed to include? If I'm amending my documents, if I'm part of the board that is amending documents, do I have to record them with the county or not? Those types of inquiries. And then homeowner rights and responsibilities. This I would characterize more so directed as a homeowner that doesn't per se have a complaint, that they're not calling to say my board or my CAM is not doing X, Y, and Z, but rather trying to understand, hey, what are my rights? Do I have a right to, I received a notice of violation in the mail. Do I have a right to a hearing? How do I resolve, what are some options that I have in order to resolve a dispute that I have, maybe with another homeowner, maybe with the board? So those that general breakdown. And then really our fourth major section would be HOA operations and governance generally. And again, because we have such a wide array of the nature of complaints that inquiries that we receive, it's difficult to categorize those specifically. But what we do and can do is really categorize the nature and the level of complaints that we receive. Which brings us to our next section. In 2022, we saw a significant increase in the number of complaints that we received. And in fact, we saw a rise of 51%. In between January 1st of 2022 and December 31st, we categorized more than 1,000 complaints, and as compared to not to say a mere, because 695 complaints is a lot of complaints as well in the year prior in 2021. But this is a pretty marked increase in complaints that we've received this year. This is really just a side-by-side complaints by month, with 2022 being in orange and blue being 2021. It's no surprise that the blue line is lower just because of the overall number of complaints that we received. But it's all, what I find interesting about this is the spikes that you see from time to time and the dropping off. Now, there's a myriad of reasons for that, perhaps, but if you look year over year, you tend to see here, for instance, in November, you see a spike. Maybe not as great in 2022 as 2021, but there are some trends there, and that has to do with again, a lot of different factors. Maybe it's the budget season for you all, or maybe it's time in summer breaks when we're spending more time outside, and so you have pool complaints. You might have other common element or park usage, those types of things that might increase the number of complaints that we receive overall. It's important to point out to you all that the HOA Center does receive complaints in a variety of ways. For those of you that have not done so in the past, we receive them by online submission or electronic mail, email, telephone, facsimiles for those of you that have a fax machine still, and of course mail. I mean, we assume not everyone has access to an email account, so if you need to mail us something, you can mail it to our office, to the attention of the HOA Center, and it is received by Nick and Amanda and processed just the same as if you used our online portal, which we refer to as e-license, in order to do those. It's also important that you all be familiar, because one of the things we hear a lot about is the concern of retaliation. If I'm a homeowner and I'm complaining about my board, I'm concerned maybe that I might think my board members are going to take it out on me that I filed a complaint against them. If that's the case, I want you to all be cognizant of the fact that we do have the ability to receive complaints anonymously. So if you have fears of retaliation, founded or unfounded, that's not for me to say. But if you have that concern, you can submit them anonymously, because it's important for you all to understand this. By filing a complaint with the division, it becomes a record of the state, and therefore someone else out there in the world could submit what we call a CORA, a Colorado Open Records Act request, CORA, and say, I want to see all the complaints that were received against my HOA, or I want to receive all of the requests that were made by any HOA or against any HOA in the state of Colorado last month, or what have you, whatever it might be. So, so if you have concerns about retaliation, I want you to be aware that an anonymous ability to file anonymously is available to you. In our breaking down of complaints, we've broken down the state into some geographical regions, which this map generally shows. You look at this figure and you say, well, where's number one? And that's because number one is just the Denver metropolitan area expressly. Regions 2 and 3, I want to also call your attention to, which primarily is up and down the Front Range, not including El Paso County and the like, though. And the reason I point that out is because we see approximately 75% of all of the complaints deriving from regions 1, 2, and 3. And I think the most logical explanation for that is simply because that is where the vast majority of our associations are. Absolute respect to Region 8 here, but we don't have as many HOAs down this direction. No doubt, as Colorado continues to grow, we will see more and more communities that in these areas, not only common interest communities, but I think very likely, I think it's a safe assumption that we'll also see metro districts and special districts being developed in some of these outer regions, 4, 5, 9, and 8, for instance. We'll see how that pans out over time. But so here again, this is in 1, 2, and 3 here. That's where we see 75% of our complaints across the state. That doesn't mean anything for how we look into the complaints that we receive from other regions. It's just I think it's a mere fact of the population. We also analyze our complaints by the community types. Amanda talked about community planned communities and condominiums and cooperatives earlier. We break down our complaints by community type as well, and here you'll see the lion's share coming from condominiums and planned communities, and that in large part again is because that's what the majority of our CICs in Colorado are. But we also do have a robust timeshare industry in the state of Colorado, although we only see a handful of complaints from timeshare or pertaining to timeshares. In this case, we actually during 2022 we received 0 complaints about cooperatives. Good job for you all you cooperatives out there that are but and then that number varies year over year, of course, too. We do some comparisons of these complaints by the size of the community. In Colorado, the median number of units is 41 units, and the average size or average number of units in communities is 109. So, so going back to 4th grade math for a moment, the median is, if I have a list of every single one of the HOAs, and I take out the end of each end, and then this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then this way, this middle one is the median. The average is a different number. So, but nevertheless, I think if the number of units in your complexes are somewhere in between this 41 and 109, it's fair to say that by size, by number of units, I suppose, you're an average community. That is not to say, though, that your community is like every other community of your size. We have many factors that go into that, the age of the community, the type of community, the size of the community, the types of amenities you have. A question we receive a lot is, hey, this is how old my community is, and this is how big it is. What should our HOA fee dues be on a monthly basis or an annual basis? Unfortunately, we can't answer that question, and that's because your community might have amenities that all these other like similarly looking communities don't have. They don't have the same amenities. So so it's a difficult question to find, but for us to really help answer for you, unfortunately. But nevertheless, we definitely see the greatest number of complaints for CICs that have between 101 units and 500 units. As you can see here, with 391 complaints, this 37% here is what we see the most common, and then each of these breakdowns. Another way that we compare here is by management arrangement. Again, self-managed versus professionally managed. And one thing I really want to point out here, I find it very interesting, is that the overall breakdown of a previous figure that we talked about, it's Amanda discussed briefly that it was about 80-20 split between what the number of professionally managed versus the self-managed communities in here. What we interestingly see is that approximately only 18% of the complaints pertain to self-managed and 82% pertain to the professionally managed communities. That means that they're kind of on par with one another. To say it another way, we don't see a disproportionately larger or smaller number of complaints against self-managed or against CAMs. They seem to be in proportion to the number of communities that are managed in that fashion. So I think that that's a really interesting point to make, or observation that we've made this year. So again, by respondent type. Now this what this next section that we analyze is also similar. By a respondent type is who are the complainants complaining about? Am I directing my complaint against a board member, or am I directing my complaint against a management company, for instance? And here you'll see that of our 1,000 plus complaints, we're seeing about 600, well, it was exactly 640 complaints against a manager or the management company, and then complaints directed at board members is about 421. Now, something we haven't mentioned before, previous to this, is declarant. In some cases, we also can receive a complaint against a declarant, and that's that's the fancy term that we use for the developer. Some of your communities that are more new, they may still be under declarant control, or once they're under homeowner control, which is dictated by statute, the transfer from declarant to homeowner control. The new board, the board members that have been appointed by votes of the unit owners, have discovered, I think that maybe our declarant wasn't doing everything that they were supposed to do. So that would really be what would fit into this number of 4 complaints against declarants that we've received. So so again, keeping that in mind as a community member, board member, homeowner, it doesn't matter. You can be just specific. The more detail you give us in your complaint, the more helpful, the more detail we can provide here, and then therefore the more information that goes to our director as well as to the state legislatures, the General Assembly as well. So this next section is a breakdown of all of the complaints that we have received over time, or over the year, but by different types. We generally have identified each of these. I believe that it's 22 different types of complaints. Perhaps it's the declarant not following through with the transfer of control. Perhaps that it is a complaint about landscaping or discrimination. As you can see here, the vast, or really the greatest section here is, of course, communication by with the homeowners, or between the homeowners and the board and the community management company, the CAM. And so that is why in our HOA forums, you're going to hear Nick and I, we're going to sound like a broken record, especially when we're addressing board members and CAMs here. The more communication that you can provide your homeowners, the better, as a general rule. I suspect that as communication is enhanced by within your communities, the number of these complaints will decrease. So that's just my 2 cents, but it is something that we really want to emphasize for you all, is that a large majority of these complaints can probably be rectified by enhanced communication, be that newsletters, be that open board meetings, be that providing agendas for your board meetings, and letting people know in advance, although you're maybe not required by statute to tell them about when a board meeting is, as opposed to a unit owner meeting. If you communicate with them, you take the wind out of that sail, because you're effectively communicating. That makes it so that a homeowner that wants to participate can participate, because they actually know that the meeting's taking place, for instance. Those types of things are important takeaways for you all to notice. There are 3 other sections that I want to call out this year in particular, because they are fairly sizable here, and that's improper or selective enforcement of covenants. We saw an increase in the nature of these types of complaints year over year. Selective enforcement, in short, is I'm going to enforce the parking ban against that person, but because I don't really, well, for whatever reason, but I'm not going to enforce it against my best buddy, the guy that I go watch football with on Sundays. That is something that we call selective enforcement, and that is against the rules, and a court of law will go against that. They will take a board that, or a CAM that is that they believe to be enforcing selectively, they will hold them to task in that way. So uniform enforcement of covenants and use restrictions and rules and regulations is imperative for boards and CAMs across the board, across your community. We saw an increase in regulatory compliance and health and safety. In part, this might be because health and safety was expressly called out in one of the legislative the legislative bills that passed in 2022. So it might have brought that to the attention of complainants to a certain extent. But nevertheless, that health and safety issue is closely related to the next subject that I'd like to talk about, which is not performing maintenance or repairs or construction issues within your community. This can commonly be a health and safety issue. If I have an exterior stairs that are not being shoveled of snow, or the wood is rotting away, that's a health and safety violation and a maintenance issue. Clearly, and a complainant that is referring to that, they're going to get a tag for both of those. So they're closely intertwined in many respects. But maintenance is a big issue, and it's related to something that we see as a growing problem in the state of Colorado, which is the insurability of your communities. Be it fire mitigation, that's a maintenance issue. If you live up in the urban wildlife interface, or in the mountains overall, or where wildfire is a danger, and we all know from incidences like the Marshall Fire most recently that even if you think you don't live in some of those places that are potentially endangered, that you might be. That's a maintenance issue, in our opinion, that we look into, and that we would tag as under this not performing maintenance issue. So, with that being said, just a few more points that I wanted to talk about as we close out the 2022 report. In addition to a lot of enhanced efforts to make sure that we can get inquiries responded to and address complaints. We've also made a lot of improvements to the HOA Information and Resource Center's website, including references to. I'd like to reference a translation tool that we have available on our website. So even if English is not your first language, we do have a translation tool. So you could read some of our information in a language that is more comfortable for you, for instance. So that some of those technological advances are part of what we're most proud of in that we've taken during the 2022 time period here. And so finally, our very last section that I'll address, and then if there are any outstanding questions, certainly leave it open. This is a new section that we included in this year that had not been in some of our previous years, but I wanted to include some references to some resources for readers. The Colorado Bar Association is a wonderful tool to find an attorney, be it an attorney for the board to represent the board, or the opposite, which is to if you are looking for an attorney to represent you in a dispute against your board or against your CAM. The licensed lawyer tool available through the Colorado Bar Association is a wonderful way to find an attorney. The Colorado General Assembly, I mentioned earlier that we have that we are in the midst of the legislative session right now. Not only does this website have a Find My Legislator tool, but it also has detailed bill tracking. If you want to know the status of a bill, maybe you read an article that said that there's this bill pending. Maybe you want to follow that day by day. Maybe you want to join in and listen to testimony, or even, as I'm sure some of our listeners here have done, is actually testify before the Senate or testify before the House committees on these bills in support or against. You can do that and find information on that through the Colorado General Assembly's website. And again, each of those links can be found down here. The Colorado Judicial Branch is a wonderful tool where you can find forms. If you're going to pursue an action in small claims court, the Judicial Branch website has forms that have been approved by the Supreme Court already, so that you can say, this is what I need to include in my complaint or in my response in an official legal proceeding. It also has links to mediators that if you have a dispute that you think might be able to get resolved through mediation, you might be able to, you could utilize the Office of Dispute Resolution, which is part of the Colorado Judicial Branch, for that purpose, to find a mediator. And then two additional resources then before we close out here, which one being Colorado Legal Services. Colorado Legal Services is a wonderful organization that offers pro bono work for individuals that meet a certain financial requirement that are below a certain financial amount, as well as seniors. So if you are seeking, whether it be related to HOAs in particular or other matters, Colorado Legal Services is a really important tool available to you. And then finally, the Community Association Institute. This is a private trade group that we refer to as CAI, and CAI has all sorts of tools on it. Not only could you very likely, if let's say you're a board member that's looking to find a CAM, you could utilize their resources to vet some potential candidates for that. But also, let's say you're looking for an insurance vendor or a roofing vendor or an electrician or a plumber. They have vendors, a vendor search on their website. So it's a great tool, whether you're a member of them or not, that you can utilize to help find a lot of different information out there. And of course, if you're a community association manager that's joined us today, you may already be a member of CAI. But those same resources are available to you whether you are a member of CAI or not. So really, really important, helpful organization across the community. So with that, I want to thank you all for visiting with us today and learning about the report. And as we close out here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if Nick and Amanda, are there any outstanding questions at the current time?
There are a few. I did see some on the registrations. Actually, I wanted to answer that one. This one's actually from Mary Hudson. She's asking for the registration, some questions. The physical address only allows mail to a PO box, but the physical address is still what is requested. Actually, no, PO box is fine. Mary, PO box is fine. There are a lot of HOA registrations with the PO box. If that is the only address that you're able to, that you have, I mean, we do want to get that information, and that information, that's sufficient enough for us when it comes to the HOA's registration.
I think it's important to point out there, Amanda, the division does not mail anything out. We communicate electronically with the HOA registrants and the designated agents. We do not mail anything any longer. We have in years past, but we do not any longer. So the address per se does not need to be an address that is acceptable, that can receive mail, or that is even monitored. And oftentimes what we're looking for when we're talking about the address of the community, it could even be an intersection. We want to know, is this the Elk Ranch, for instance, that is in Louisville, or is this the Elk Ranch that it's in Pagosa Springs? Because there are lots of your communities that have similar names to one another, and so we're looking to just make sure that when you call us, that we know that we're talking about the correct association. If that helps, but it does not need to be a valid mailing address.
And that's one thing I will add also, is that with the like I said in the beginning with the registration part of it, is the Secretary of State's going to be your best friend when it comes to finding out what information is going to be on there. A lot of the information provided on the Secretary of State side of it is actually going to be mirrored to what the HOA's registration would be. So yeah, addresses, yeah, we could definitely have like the cross streets. But we do also record, I do want to mention, we do also record counties. We want to know what county it is in, because we have we do record that information, and on our list of all HOAs that is available for download on our website, on our license lookup, you'll see that you are able to filter if you wanted to by county. So that's why county is definitely going to be very important when it comes to that.
Absolutely. I think other than that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, about any questions that are outstanding, but other than a few comments towards the very bottom here, which is in general, the authorization, the authority, or the for enforcement authority within our office, and with respects to that, and many of you probably have heard us say something to this extent in the past. We would encourage you to share your thoughts in that respect, whether it's more or less authority, what have you. We don't take a position one way or another but rather what we do is follow our legislative mandates. If you believe that that something can change, of course, providing that insight to us, I appreciate, and I know that Nick and Amanda do as well. But I also want to encourage you to reach out to your legislators about that, and especially in a legislative session such as the 2023 session, HOAs and of course also because of metro districts, there's a lot of legislation pertaining to metro districts that have been ongoing this year too. These communities type legislation related to communities and housing in general tend to be right now on the forefront of a lot of legislators' minds, and therefore I would encourage you to share your opinions and thoughts with your legislators and say, more or less authority, what have you. Dispute resolution authority is something that comes up very often. I'm not encouraging you to say one thing or another. That's not my place, but rather for you to share your opinions about that. So some of your comments, Mary and Helen and Candace, certainly we appreciate you sharing those thoughts with us. But I want to encourage you to reach out to your legislators about some of that, which you can certainly find that information on the Colorado General Assembly's website. Forgive me, I drew a blank there for a moment. So thank you for those thoughts. Anything else there, Nick?
David, I'm not seeing anything at the moment.
Well, excellent. Well, then with that,
I was just going to say real quick, we do have a webinar coming up on April 21st on a lot of what David was talking about today, but feel free to join us for that. It's going to be on HOA complaints and kind of what goes into that process here in this office. But yeah, thank you all very much for joining us. Yeah.
Thanks so very much. Have a great rest of your day. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.